Hey viewers, in this video we are diving into the Chronicles of Narnia.When. We will break down the storyline, offer a concise plot summary, take a closer look at the cast and their character. We will also discuss the film production detail and box office performance. To wrap things up, we will share our overall review along with personal reaction to the movie. So let's get started. When we talk about early 2000s fantasy cinema, there are a few littles but that naturally dominate the conservation. Yet quietly and sometimes unfairly, the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion and the Witch of the and the Wardrobe 2005 continue to stand as one of the most meaningful fantasy film of its era. This is a movie that deserves discussion not because it tried to reinvent the genre but because it carefully preserved what classic fantasy has always been about: imagination, sincerity, and timeless storytelling. From a genre perspective, Neria sits firmly in the realm of high fantasy, but it approached the genre with a noticeably traditional mindset. Unlike darker or more cynical fantasy world, this film embraces a clear moral structure and fairy tale rhythm. The fantasy here is not ironic, it's easy, earnest. Taking animals, mythical creatures, and uncharted landscapes are presented without apology, invited the audience to believe in the world rather than question it. That confidence in gender identity is one of the key reasons the movie remains worth discussing today. The film was directed by Adamson, a choice that raised eyebrow at the time. Adamson was best known for animated hits like Shrinking, not live action fantasy epics, but that background turned out to be a strength. Adamson approached Neria with the storytelling sensitivity rather than blockbuster mentality. His direction favored clarity, emotional accessibility, and pacing that follow the word to breathe. He does not rush the audience through spectacle. Instead, he lets moments settle, trusting viewers, especially younger ones, to observe the tone and meaning. Adamson's direction also reflects a careful balancing act. On one side, he respects the literary root of the C.S. Lewis novel, maintaining its classical structure and symbolic weight. On the other hand, he adopts the material in a way that feels cinematic rather than theatrical. The result is a film that feels grounded in tradition but never dated, a rare achievement in fantasy filmmaking. The production style further reinforced this balance between old and new. Visually, The Lion, The Witch, and The Wardrobe was ambitious of its time, relying on a blend of practical sets, real locations, and early 2000 CGI. What stands out is how restrained the visual effects feel compared to many modern fantasy films. The goal was not visual overload but immersion. Creatures are designed to feel tangible, environments are textured and weathered, and the world of Narnia carries a physical weight that helps sell the fantasy. Costume and set designs lean heavily into medieval and mythological influences, reinforces the storybook quality of the film. Nothing feel overly stylized for shock values. Instead, the production design support the idea and that this world has history and rules. Even the color palette, cool whites, deep blues, earthy browns, and quietly communicate mood and genre without calling attention to itself. Another reason this film is worth revisiting is its place in cinematic history. Released during the golden age of fantasy adaptation, Narnia stood alongside giants like Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings, yet it chose a different path. Where other leans into darkness or complexity, Neria leaned into sincerity. That creative choice, guided by its director and production team, is exactly what it make it an interesting subject for discussion today. Ultimately, the film is worth talking about because it represents a kind of fantasy filmmaking that value clarity, emotional honesty, and classical craftsmanship. It reminds us that fantasy does not always need to be gritty or ironic to be powerful. Sometimes believably, wholeheartedly in magic is the boldest creative decision of all. The production budget of the film, it reflects the ambition of large-scale fantasy adaptation intended to launch a long-running franchise. Released in 2005, the film is reportedly carried an estimated production cost of around 180 million, placing it among the most expensive film of its time. This level of investment signals the studio confidence in both the source material and the market demand for epic fantasy following the success of similar genre titles in the early 2000s. From a cost perspective, the budget can be broadly understood as the price of building a believable fantasy world from the group up. Unlike contemporary set film, Narnia required the creation of an entirely separate universe, complete with fictional geography, non-human character, and large-scale action sequence. These requirements naturally push the production into a higher budget bracket. A significant portion of the budget was allocated to visual effect and creature imagination. The film featured a wide range of digitally enhanced characters, including talking animal and mythological beings such as Cator, Fawns, and Walls. Creating these characters require a combination of CGI, motion capture, and voice performance integration, all of which were resource intensive in 2005. At the time, visual effect technology was advanced but not as cost efficient as it is today, meaning even a relatively short screen time for complex creature demanded substantial financial investment. And other major area of resource allocation was set construction and location shooting. The production relied heavily on real world location in New Zealand, Czech Republic, and Poland, chosen for their natural landscape and suitability for large fantasy environment. While location shooting add authenticity, it also increased costs related to travel, logistics, crew accommodation, and equipment transport. In addition, numerous large-scale sets such as castles, villages, and battlefields were constructed to support scenes that could not rely solely on digital background. Costume and production design also represented a notable budgetary commitment. The film required a wide variety of costume for human, animal, and mythical creature, each designed to effect a medieval inspired fantasy aesthetic. Armor, weapons, and props were produced in large quantities, especially for battle sequencing involving hundreds of extras. These tangible elements contributed to the film's grounded visual tone but require sustained financial support through production. When comparing Narnia to similar films of its era, its budget aligned closely with other major fantasy releases. The Lord of the Ring, The Fellowship of the Ring 2001 had an estimated production budget of around $93 million, though it benefited from being part of a cost sharing trilogy film simultaneously. Later entries in that trilogy exceeded $100 million individually. Meanwhile, Harry Potter and Globet of Fire 2005 reportedly closed approximately $150 million. In this context, in the area $180 million budget places it at the higher end of the spectrum, reflecting both inflection and the technical demand of its creature heavy storytelling. It is also important to note that Narnia was designed as a franchise starter, which often justify higher upfront spending. Studios typically invest more in the first installment to establish visual standard, develop reusable digital assets, and build audience trust. Many of the costs associated with world building, such as creature model design, concept and production pipeline are intended to be amortized across sequels. In analytical terms, the production budget of the line, the wish and the wardrobe can be seen as a calculated risk. The film's high cost was driven by genre expectation, technical complexity, and franchise ambitions rather than extravagance alone. While expensive, the budget was consistent with industry norms for epic fantasy at the time and aligned with the creative goal of delivering a visual, credible, and immersive cinematic world. The movie belongs firmly to the high fantasy genre, but it approaches fantasy in the classical and traditional way rather than a modern or subversion one. It embraces the idea of a fully imagined world governed by magic, prophecy, and clear moral faces. Instead of blurring genre lines or deconstructing fantasy tropes, the film commits to them completely. This commitment gives the story a timeless quality, making it feel closer to a fairy tale or myth than a contemporary adventure film. The fantasy elements are presented with confidence, inviting the audience to accept the world as it is rather than question its logic. The overall atmosphere is carefully designed to feel immersive and emotionally grounded. Visually, the world is cold, expansive, and majestic, especially in its early moment. Snow covered landscape, quiet forest, and imposing structure create a sense of stillness and tension. This atmosphere supports the emotional tone of the film, which often feel restrained and reflective rather than constantly energetic. There is a lingering sense of waiting and imbalance in the world, which subtly shape how the audience experience each scene. As the film progresses, the mood gradually shifts. What being as quiet and mysterious slowly grow more powerful and resolute. This transition is handled gently without abrupt tonal changes. The film allows its atmosphere to evolve naturally, moving from isolation and uncertainty toward unity and purpose. This emotional progression is central to the viewing experience and reinforces the classical fantasy structure, where darkness is slowly challenged by light. Pacing play a major role in maintaining its mood. The film adopts a deliberate and patient rhythm, especially in the first half. Scenes are giving room to breathe, allowing the audience to take in the environment and understood the emotional stake without feeling rushed. This slower pacing may feel restrained compared to modern fantasy film, but it serves the story tone well. It emphasizes discovery, wonder, and reflection rather than constant action. When the pace increases later in the film, it does so in a controlled way. Action sequences are purposeful and measured, never overwhelming the narrative. Even during large scale moments, the film maintains clarity and emotional focus. This balance ensures that the mood remains consistent and that spectators support the story rather than dominating it. Tonally, the film is sincere and emotionally direct. It avoids sarcasm, heavy humor, or self awareness, which allow its theme to land with clarity. The tone respects its audience, particularly younger viewers, by taking its ideas seriously. At the same time, it does not rely on excessive darkness to create emotional weight. Instead, it uses contrast, quiet moment against moment of intensity to maintain emotional engagement. Statistically, the film favored traditional cinematic choices. The camera often uses wide shot to emphasize scale and environment reinforces the epic nature of the fantasy world. Movement is smooth and composed. The editing avoid aggressive technique that might disrupt the atmosphere. The visual style support the story rather than calling attention to itself, which help maintain immersion. Overall, the genre and the mood of the movie are defined by restrained sincerity and classical storytelling values. It creates a fantasy experience that feel calm, meaningful, and emotionally steady, rather than overwhelming the viewers with constant intensity. It invites them into a carefully paced world where atmosphere and tone are just as important as action. This approach is what gives the film its enduring appeal and make it a a distinctive example of traditional fantasy cinema. Before watching this movie, audience expectations are largely shaped by its reputation as a classical fantasy story and by the cultural similarity of its source material. Many viewers come into the film already anticipating a traditional, almost storybook style experience rather than a fast paced or experimental one. This expectation set the emotional tone even before the opening scene being. The movie signals clearly that it wants to be taken as a senior fantasy tale. An audience often prepare themselves for a journey built in on imagination, moral clarity, and emotional simplicity. From a viewer's demographic perspective, families and younger audience are often the primary group drawn to the film. Parents tend to expect a film that is safe, emotionally grounded, and suitable for sheer viewing. They anticipate clear lessons, gentle pacing, and a sense of wonder that appeal to children without feeling chaotic or overwhelming. At the same time, older viewers, particularly those who grew up with the book, approach the film with a sense of nostalgia. They expect faithless in tone, even if not in every detail, and they look for emotional resonance rather than modern spectacle. Teenage viewers and younger adults often come in with slightly different expectation. They may expect the film to function as an entry level fantasy experience, one that introduces epic theme without the density or darkness of more mature fantasy franchise. For this group, expectations are really centered on adventure, imaginative visual, and emotional arc that are easy to follow. They may not be looking for complexity, but they do expect the story to take itself seriously and deliver moment of tension and drift. In terms of anticipated theme, audience generally expect clear contrast between good and evil, freedom and control, and innocence and responsibility. Weaver tend to anticipate a moral framework that is easy to understand, where the choices matter and consequences are visible. Many expect themes of courage, loyalty, sacrifice, and growth to be present, handled in a way that feel accessible rather than heavy-handed. The expectation is not suitable symbolism but emotional clarity, where the film communicates its idea through atmosphere and character movement rather than dialogue heavy explanations. Another common expectation is emotional safety. Audience often assume the film will explore dark idea without being oppressive. There is an understanding that danger and conflict exist, but they are framed in a way that ultimately reassures rather than disturb. This expectation make the film especially appealing to viewers who enjoy fantasy but are less comfortable with graphic intensity or relentless darkness. For genre fan, expectations are shaped by familiarity with other major fantasy films of the same era. Weaver who enjoy epic fantasy often expect grand landscape, myth-inspired creature, and a sense of skill that suggests a larger world beyond what is shown on screen. However, they may also expect this film to feel gentler and more restrained compared to heavier fantasy and franchises. There is often an assumption that the movie will prioritize atmosphere and emotion over constant action or complex, slow, long-time fantasy reader often expect the film to respect traditional storytelling structure. They look for a clear beginning, middle, and end, along with a tone that honor classic myth rather than modern reinterpretation. These viewers tend to appreciate a slower pace and a more forgiving of simplicity if the word feel authentic and emotionally honest. At the same time, some viewers approach the film with cautious expectation. Those who prefer darker, more morally ambiguous stories may appreciate a lighter experience and adjust their expectation accordingly. Rather than looking for edge or unpredictability, they expect consistency, warmth, and a sense of moral direction. Or overall audience expectation before watching the film are centered on comfort, wonder, and sincerity. Viewers generally expect a fantasy experience that feels safe but meaningful, imaginative but grounded. They anticipate a film that invites them into another world without demanding excessive emotional or intellectual effort. This alignment between expectation and delivery is the key reason the movie continues to resonate with a wide and diverse audience. This movie is clearly designed with a broad but carefully defined target audience in mind, aiming to balance accessibility with emotional depth. At its core, it is a fantasy film created for viewers who value imagination, moral clarity, and classical storytelling rather than complexity or realism. The structure, tone, and presentation all point toward an audience that is open to wonder and comfortable with sincerity. From an age group perspective, the primary target audience is children and early teenager. Younger viewers are drawn to the magical elements, taking animals, and clear sense of adventure. The films speak to this age group by presenting a world that is easy to understand with a straightforward conflict and visible consequence. It avoids excessive darkness or physiological intensity, making it suitable for family viewing. Parents can comfortably introduce this film to children, knowing it offers excitement or without overwhelming them. That said, the movie is not limited to younger viewers. Older, teenager, and adult are also part of the intended audience, particularly those who enjoy reflective or nostalgic storytelling. For adults, the film offers emotional themes that resonate on a quieter level, such as responsibility, courage, and personal growth. These themes are communicated through atmosphere and tone rather than complexity, making them accessible without feeling shallow. Adults who appreciate traditional narrative often find value in the film calm pacing and classical structure. In terms of interest, the film is made for viewers who enjoy imaginative word and symbolic storytelling. It appeals strongly to those who like fantasy that feel timeless rather than trendy. Viewers who are drawn to myth-inspired setting, medieval aesthetic, and fairy tale logic are likely to connect with the world. The emphasis on atmosphere over constant action suit audience who enjoy being immersed in a world and allowing the story to unfold gradually. The movie also appealed to viewers who prefer emotionally safe entertainment. It is designed for those who want tension without extreme intensity and conflict without cynicism. People who enjoy a story with hopeful outcome and clear emotional direction are well served here. The film reassured its audience through consistency in tone and message, making it a comfortable choice for relaxed or shared viewing experience. From a genre preferences standpoint, the film is tailored for fans of classic fantasy rather than modern or experimental variation of the genre. It catered to viewing who enjoy fantasy with clear moral boundaries, familiar archetype, and a strong sense of order. Unlike darker fantasy that thrive on moral ambiguity, this movie embraces clarity and purpose. This makes it particularly appealing to viewers who value emotional resolution and thematic straightforwardness. The story unfolds in a way that mirrors classic novels, allowing time for atmosphere and emotional weight. These viewers tend to appreciate that the film does not rush through its ideas or rely on shock values to maintain interest. At the same time, the movie may also be less appealing to viewers who prefer fast-paced action, heavy realism, or complex character psychology. Those who enjoy unpredictable narratives or moral gray storytelling might find the film too gentle or structured. However, this is less a flaw and a more reflection of the audience the movie is intentionally designed for. Overall, the target audience for this film includes children, families, and adults who enjoy senior imaginative storytelling. It is made for viewers who prefer warmth over edge, atmosphere over intensity, and clarity over complexity. By focusing on universal theme and a classical fantasy tone, this movie successfully reaches an audience that values comfort, wonder, and emotional honesty in their viewing experience. The emotional experience this movie promises is rooted in warmth, sincerity, and a gradual sense of emotional growth. Rather than aiming to overwhelm the viewers with constant intensity or shock. The film invites its audience into a steady emotional journey that unfolds at a calm, deliberate pace. From the beginning, the mood is designed to feel reflective and slightly restrained, encouraging viewers to settle into the world and absorb its atmosphere before becoming emotionally invested. In terms of mood, the film establishes a feeling of quiet tension mixed with wonder. There is a sense of stillness and imbalance that linger in the background, creating emotional curiosity rather than urgency. This mood allows viewers to feel safe while still sensing that something meaningful is at stake. As the story progresses, the emotional tone slowly evolves, shifting toward hope, courage, and reassurance. The transition is smooth and intentional, giving the audience time to emotionally adjust rather than focusing abrupt reactions. The film mood is also consistently sincere. It avoids tiny, exaggerated humor or emotional detachment, choosing instead to engage the viewers with genuine emotional beats. This sincerity helps the audience from a direct emotional connection to the world and its ideas. Viewers are encouraged to feel empathy, concern, and quiet excitement rather than adrenaline fueled thrill. The emotional experience is meant to feel steady and grounded, not chaotic. The themes play a central role in shaping how the audience feels throughout the film. One of the most prominent emotional theme is growth. The story emphasizes the idea of stepping into the responsibility and learning to act with courage even when fear is present. This theme resonates emotionally but validating uncertainty while offering reassurance that growth is present. This theme resonates emotionally by validating uncertainty while offering reassurance that growth is possible. Viewers are invited to reflect on their own moments of hesitation and bravery, creating a subtitle emotional connection beyond the screen. Another key theme is loyalty and belonging. The film emphasizes emotional bond, trust, and the comfort of standing together in the face of challenge. This theme fosters feeling of connection and unity, making the emotional experience feel inclusive rather than isolating. The audience is guided toward feeling of reassurance and emotional safety, reinforcing the idea that challenge can be faced collectively. Sacrifice is another important emotional element, though it is present with restraint rather than dwelling on loss or despair. The film frames sacrifice as meaningful and purposeful. This approach reassures emotional maturity without creating emotional heaviness. Viewers are meant to feel respect and solidarity rather than sadness, allowing the emotional weight to feel uplifting rather than draining. The intended impact of the movie is to leave the audience feeling emotionally satisfied and reassured. It seems to provide a sense of clear and emotional balance rather than lingering uncertainty. By the end, viewers are expected to feel that the journey was worthwhile and that the emotional investment was rewarded. This is specifically important for family audience who often seek films that offer emotional resolution and stability. The film also intend to inspire quiet reflection rather than intense emotional release. Instead of promoting strong emotional extremity, encouraging viewers to internalize its message and carry them forward. The emotional experience lingers gently, allowing the theme to resonate without demanding immediate interpretation. For young viewers, the emotional impact is often one of comfort and inspiration. The film reassures them that fear can be overcome and that goodness has meaning. For older viewers, the emotional experience may feel nostalgic or contemplative, reminding them of the full value of sincerity and moral clarity in storytelling. Overall, the movie promises an emotional experience that is calm, hopeful, and meaningful. It is designed to make viewer feel emotionally supported rather than challenged, offering a journey defined by warmth, growth, and reassurance. Rather than leaving the audience emotionally exhausted, it aimed to leave them grounded, reflective, and quietly uplifted. At its core, the story is built around the idea of transition, moving from innocence into responsibility, from passivity into choice, and from isolation into belonging. The narrative is less concerned with the mechanics of event and more focused on what it means to grow into moral awareness. In abstract terms, the story concept center on an individual being called into a larger moral order, one that existed before them and will continue after them. The world they encounter is not simply a place of wonder and a space where choices carry weight and neutrality is no longer possible. One of the central themes is the waking of responsibility. The story suggests that innocence is not lost through corruption alone, but through the realization that one's action matter. Characters are confronted with a reality where avoiding choices become a choice itself. This theme frame growth not as a sudden transformation but as a gradual acceptance of duty. Responsibility arrives quietly, often before readiness, and the story emotional power lies in how that responsibility is eventually embraced rather than resisted. Another major theme is moral clarity. The story operates within a framework where right and wrong are distinct but not effortless. Goodness is not portrayed as convenience or comfort, it requires courage, honesty, and sacrifice. In this way, the message is not that goodness automatically prevails, but that it must be actively chosen. The story reinforces the idea that moral alignment is revealed through action, especially in moments of fear or uncertainty. This clarity gives the narrative a mythic quality, aligning with it with timeless fables rather than modern ambiguity. Belonging is also central to the story's core idea. The narrative explores the emotional moment from separation to unity, emphasizing that strength is found not in individual dominance but in shared purpose. Characters who, being disconnected emotionally or morally, are drawn into a collective identity that gives meaning to their action. These themes suggest that moral growth is deeply connected to community and that true fulfillment comes from contributing to something larger than oneself. The story concept also revolves around balance and restoration. The word presenting is not merely broken, it is incomplete, waiting for alignment. Disorder exists not because of chores alone, but because harmony has been disrupted. The abstract message here is that system, whether moral, emotional, or societal, require active stewardship. Restoration is not automatic, it depends on individuals stepping into roles that demand selflessness and integrity. This idea frames that narrative as a process of realignment rather than conquest. Sacrifice is another key theme, presenting not as loss for its own sake but as transformation. The story treats sacrifice as a bridge between fear and meaning. It suggests that giving something up can be act of creation rather than destruction. This theme reinforces the message that love and loyalty are not passive emotion but deliberate commitment. Sacrifice in this context because the ultimate expression of moral choice, turning abstract value into tangible action. This message of hope runs quietly beneath all other themes. Hope is not depicted as optimism or denial of hardship, but as trust in purpose. Even when future is uncertain, the story implies that alignment with truth and courage create forward momentum. Hope emerges from action rather than expectation, reinforcing the idea that belief gains strength through commitment. This gives the narrative emotional stability, allowing it to explore darkness without being consumed by it. The story concept also reflects the idea of identity formation. Characters are not defined by their starting point but by how they respond to challenge. Identity is shown as fluid, shaped by decision rather than labels. This abstract approach to identity suggests that growth is always possible regardless of past weakness or failure. The story does not erase flaws, instead, it frames them as part of the journey toward moral awareness. Ultimately, the core idea of the story is about answering a call, one that is not always clearly explained or easily accepted. It is about learning that meaning often arrives disguised as responsibility, and that courage is less about fearlessness than about acting despite fear. Through its theme, message, and the story concept, the movie presents a timeless reflection on growth, choice, and moral purposes. It suggests that true transformation being when individuals stop asking what the world can offer them and start asking what they are willing to give in return. The central conflict of the movie operates on a moral and philosophical level rather than being driven slowly by physical opposition. At its heart, the tension arises from the clash between order and distortion, between a world that follow a deeper moral structure and force that seek to dominate or freeze that structure for their own end. This conflict is not simply about victory or defeat, but about whether balance, meaning, and moral direction can be restored once they have been suppressed. One of the primary moral dilemmas within this conflict is the struggle between fear and responsibility. Characters are placed in situations where retreat feels safer than engagement, and the silence feels easier than commitment. The tension comes from realization that avoiding responsibility allowing balance to continue. The conflict challenges the idea that neutrality is harmless, suggesting instead that is morally charged situation inactive can strengthen harmful forces just as collect effectively as direct sport. Another central challenge involves the temptation of comfort and self-interest. The conflict present moment where personal desire conflict with collective well-being, safety, power, and approval are offered as alternative to integrity, creating internal tension that mirror the larger struggle in the world. This dilemma emphasizes that the greatest threats are not always external; they often emerge from within when individuals choose immediate gratification over long-term responsibility. Trust is another key area of tension. The conflict explores how trust can be both a vulnerability and a strength. Character must decide whether to place faith in promises, ideals, or one another, even when doubt feels justified. These create a constant undercurrent of uncertainty. The moral question becomes whether belief in something greater than oneself is worth the risk of disappointment. This tension gives the conflict emotional growth as trust is shown to be an act of courage rather than certainty. The challenge of identity also play a significant role in the central conflict. Individuals are confronted with expectations that feel larger than their self perception. The tension lies in the gap between who they believe they are and who they are being called to become. This internal struggle fuels the border conflict, suggesting that the world fate is tied to personal acceptance of responsibility. Growth becomes a battlefield where fear of independence competes with the pull of purpose. Another layer of the conflict revolves around power and control. The opposing forces are defined not just by what they do, but how they view authority. One side seeks control through domination, stillness, and enforced obedience, while the other represents sheer responsibility and moral alignment. This creates tension between imposed order and unharmony. The conflict question where stability achieved through fear can never ever be legitimate, or whether true order must be chosen freely. Sacrifice introduced one of the most emotionally charged dilemma with the conflict. The story raises the question of whether meaningful change can occur without laws, Sacrifice is framed as a necessary but painful pathway toward restoration, forcing character to weigh personal cost against collective renewal. This tension deepens the conflict by acknowledging that moral choices often require giving something up even when the outcome is uncertain. The central conflict also explores the challenge of hope in the face of prolonged imbalance. When a world has been shaped by distortion for too long, belief in change can feel unrealistic. The tension lies in sustaining hope without clear evidence that effort will succeed. This dilemma asks whether hope is a reaction to visible progress or deliberate act of resistance against despair. The conflict suggests that hope itself can be a form of defiance. Ultimately, the central conflict is about alignment between values and action, between individual choice and collective consequence. It is not resolved through strength alone but through moral commitment and emotional courage. The tension persists until character accept that conflict can't be avoided or delegated. It demands participation, accountability, and belief in a greater moral framework. By focusing on moral dilemmas, internal challenges, and sustained tension, the movie's central conflict become a reflection on choice rather than confrontation. It asks whether individuals are willing to step into responsibility, confront their fear, and act in services of something larger themselves. In doing so, the conflict transforms from a battle for dominance into a test of moral integrity and purpose. The movie explores a range of themes that are presenting in a clear, accessible way while still carrying emotional and ethical weight, or rather than overwhelming the viewers with complexity. It focuses on universal ideas that resonate across age group and culture. These themes are woven into the emotional journey of the story, shaping how the audience understands choice, responsibility, and the belonging. One of the most prominent theme is moral responsibility. The movie repeatedly raises ethical question about what is mean to do the right thing when it is inconvenient, frightening, or costly. Characters are placed in situations where moral choices can't be avoided, and the story suggests that neutrality is not an option in moment of injustice. This theme asks viewer to consider whether moral responsibility is something we choose freely or something that eventually chooses us. The emotional arc connected to this theme center on hesitation, giving way to acceptance, reinforcing the idea that growth often brings with discomfort. Closely tied to this is the theme of courage. Courage in the movie is not portrayed as fearlessness but as action taken despite fear. This distinction is important because it reframes bravery as an emotional process rather than a personality trait. The emotional arc here involves vulnerability and self doubt, followed by gradual confidence rooted in purpose rather than ego. Ethically, the film suggests that courage is a moral obligation while others are affected by one's choices, making it a shared responsibility rather than an individual achievement. Another key theme is temptation and ethical weakness. The story acknowledges that moral failure often comes from understandable desires such as comfort, recognition, or safety. Instead of presenting wrongdoing as purely malicious, it frames it as a human response to fear and longing. This creates an ethical question about accountability. To what extent should weakness be forgiven, and where does responsibility still apply? Emotionally, this theme allows space for regret and redemption, offering the audience a compassionate but firm view of moral consequence. Belonging and unity are also central themes, explored through emotional arc that move from isolation to connection. The movie suggests that deviant weakness individual while shared purposes create strength. This theme carry culture relevance, particularly in its emphasis on cooperation across differences. The emotional experience tied to belonging is one of the reassurance and stability, reinforcing the idea that identity is strengthened through community rather than diminished by it. Ethically, the theme argues against selfish individualism in favor of collective responsibility. Sacrifice is another major theme, presenting as a meaningful but difficult choice rather than a tragic endpoint. The film raises ethical questions about whether true change can occur without personal goal. Sacrifice is framed as an act of love and commitment, not obligation or punishment. Emotionally, this theme introduces solidarity rather than disappear, encouraging viewer to see loss or as transformative rather than purely painful. This approach softens the emotional impact while still re- respecting the seriousness of the choice. The theme of leadership is explored through responsibility rather than authority. Leadership in the movie is not about dominance or control but about service and moral example. This raises ethical question about what qualifies someone to lead and whether leadership is earned through action rather than status. The emotional arc associated with leadership involves self-doubt evolving into quiet confidence, suggesting that effective leadership begins with humility. Culturally, this theme suggests our preferences for ethical leadership over authoritarian control. Hope is another underlying theme that shapes the emotional tone of the movie. Hope is not depicted as blind optimism, but as a conscious decision to believe in restoration despite uncertainty. The ethical question here is whether hope is justified when evidence is limited, or whether it is valuable precisely because it resists disappear. Emotionally, hope provides balance along the story to explore darkness without being overwhelming. It reassures viewers that effort and integrity matter even when outcomes are unclear. The movie also touches on theme of identity and growth. Characters are not defined by their mistake or fear, but they respond to challenge. This theme promotes the idea that identity is shaped through choice and moral development rather than predefined roles. Emotionally, this creates a sense of possibility and renewal, especially for younger viewers. Culturally, it reflects values of self improvement and accountability, emphasizing growth over perfection. Overall, the theme explored in the movie revolve around ethical clarity, emotional growth, and collective responsibility. The film invites viewers to reflect on how values are tested under pressure and how emotional strength develops through challenge. By grounding its theme in universal ethical questions and relatable emotional arc, the movie offers a thoughtful exploration of morality and meaning without losing its sense of warmth and accessibility. The story connects emotionally with viewers by creating an atmosphere that feels safe, senior, and quietly immersive. From the beginning, the mood invite the audience to slow down and engage an emotional level rather than a purely intellectual one. Instead of demanding immediate excitement, the film establishing a general emotional rhythm that allow viewers to ease into the word and its underlying feeling. This approach makes the emotional connection feel natural, as if the story is unfolding at a pace that respects the viewer's emotional space. Mood play a crucial role in shaping this connection. The overall tone is reflective and earnest, while moment of stillness that encourages contemplation. Even when tension is present, it is framed in a way that feels emotionally manageable. These create a viewing experience where your audience can feel concern and empathy without anxiety or emotional fatigue. The consistent mood reassures viewer that the story is guiding them toward meaning rather than shock, which build trust and emotional openness. The emotional connection is also strengthened through the story theme, which are universal and deeply human. Themes such as growth, courage, belonging, and responsibility resonate because they mirror emotional experience that many viewers recognize in their own lives. The story does not present these themes in abstract term alone. It allows the audience to feel them through gradual emotional progression. Viewer experience uncertainty before confidence, fear before courage, and isolation before connection. This emotional sequence mirror real life emotional development, making the experience relatable across age group. Another key factor in emotional connection is the theme of vulnerability. The story acknowledges fear, doubt, and hesitation as natural emotional state rather than weakness. By validating these emotions, the film allow viewer to see themselves reflecting in the emotional landscape of the narrative. This validation foster empathy and make the emotional journey feel supportive rather than judgmental. Viewers are not asked to admire perfection, they are invited to relate to imperfection and growth. Belonging is one of the most emotionally effective theme in the story. The emotional experience of moving from separation to unity tap into a fundamental human desire for connection. The story emphasizes emotional bond and shared purpose, which create feeling of reassurance and warmth for many people, especially younger ones. This theme offers emotional comfort by reinforcing the idea that acceptance and support are possible even in unfamiliar, challenging environment. The mood also evolves over time, which deepen the emotional impact. What being as quiet uncertainty gradually shift toward hope and emotional resolution. This progression allows viewer to feel a sense of emotional payoff without feeling manipulated. The emotional highs are earned through patience and consistency rather than sudden intensity. As a result, the viewer emotional investment feel rewarded, strengthening the bond between audience and the story. The story stain is another reason it connect emotionally. By avoiding exaggerated drama or excessive sentimentality, it leaves room for viewer to project their own feeling onto the narrative. This openness invites personal interpretation and reflection instead of dedicating exactly how the audience should feel. The film creates emotional space for individual responses, make the experience more personal and memorable. For films and shared viewing experience, the emotional connection is enhanced by the story balance. It offers emotional depth without alienating younger viewer and thematic meaning without overwhelming them. Adult may connect on a reflective level, appreciating the theme of responsibility and moral clarity, while children respond more directly to feeling of wonder and reassurance. This layer emotional accessibility allow different viewers to engage emotionally in their own way. Ultimately, the story connects emotionally by offering a sense of emotional guidance. It does not simply entertain, it supports the viewer through its tone and thematic consistency. The intended viewer experience is one of the calm engagement in emotional growth and quiet satisfaction. Viewers are left feeling understood rather than challenged, uplifted rather than exhausted. This emotional connection built through more universal theme and a thoughtful viewer experience is what gives the story its lasting emotional resonance. The main character in the movie are written as emotionally symbolic figure rather than deeply complex psychological portrait. This choice strongly reflects the film's classical fantasy identity. As a reviewer, it is clear that characters are designed to guide the audience through moral and emotional ideas, with each one representing a different purpose to fear, responsibility, and growth. Their strength lie not in realism but in emotional clarity and thematic purpose. At the center of the story are the Pevensie sibling Peter Pevensie, Susan Pevensie, Edmund Pevensie, and Lucy Pevensie. Together, they function as an emotional spectrum rather than a single protagonist. Each sibling embodies a distinct personality and moral position, allowing viewer to see multiple emotional reaction to the same world and challenge. This ensemble approach work well for a family oriented fantasy as it gives different audience members someone to emotionally relate to. Peter Pevensia fit the archetype of the reluctant leader. His personality trait includes seriousness, protectiveness, and insecurity masked by responsibility. From a reviewer perspective, Peter's role is defined by pressure rather than confidence. He feels the weight of expectation early on, and much of his emotional journey revolves around learning how to lead without certainty. His appeal comes from restraint. He is not naturally dominant or heroic, but he grew into responsibility through effort and self-discipline. Peter represents the theme of leadership as burden rather than privilege. Sons and Pevensie embodies the caution realistic archetype. Her defining personality trait are logic, skepticism, and emotional restraint. He often responds to uncertainty with hesitation, which make her emotionally relatable, especially to older viewer. As a reviewer, Sunson's character add balance to the group by grounding the story in rational fear rather than idealism. Her arc is less about transformation and more about emotional negotiation, learning when caution protect and when it limit growth. He represents the internal conflict between safety and courage. Edmund Pevenson is the most psychological layer of the sibling and fit the conflict archetype. His personality trait include resentment, insecurity, impulsiveness, and emotional defensiveness. Edmund's character introduced moral tension into the story by showing how personal weakness can lead to harmful choices. From a critical standpoint, Edmund's arc is one of the film's strongest elements because it treats moral failure as emotionally rooted rather than purely manipulative. His journey emphasizes accountability, regret, and the possibility of redemption, adding emotional depth to the overall narrative. Lucy's Pevensie represents the idealistic archetype and serves as the emotional heart of the story. Her personality traits include openness, empathy, and curiosity, and unwavering belief. Lucy's emotional clarity contrasts sharply with the doubt and fear of the other sibling. For a reviewer, her role is essential in maintaining the film's sincerity. She believes without calculation and trust without fearing, which reinforce the story theme of hope and moral institution. Lucy's strength lied not in authority or strategy but in emotional honesty. Beyond the sibling, Aslan functions as a symbolic character rather than conventional one. He represents moral authority, sacrifice, and guiding. His personality traits are calmness, compassion, and quiet power. From a reviewer lens, Aslan is less a character to be analyzed and more as presence that shape the emotional and ethical framework of the story. He embodies the idea that true strength is rooted in restraint and purpose rather than force. The antagonist, the White Peach, serve as a stark counterpoint to the other character. Her archetype is that of authoritarian control, and her personality trait include coldness, dominance, and the emotional detachment. He represents fear-based power and emotional suppression. As a reviewer, her effectiveness lies in how clearly she contrasts with the warmth and emotional openness of the protagonist. She does not need complexity to be impactful. Her role is thematic, symbolizing control without compassion. What stands out across these characters is the emphasis on emotional growth over physical dominance. None of the main characters being as dominant heroes. Instead, they grow through internal change, learning to trust, to take responsibility, and to act with integrity. This approach aligns closely with the movie's theme and make the character accessible to the wide audience. Overall, the character work in the movie is intentionally archetypal. Peter, Susan Edmund, Lucy, Aslan, and the White Witch are not designed to be dissected psychologically but to be felt emotionally. Their clear personality trait and symbolic role support the film tone and message, making the character experience emotionally direct, sincere, and memorable. The acting performance in the movie are shaped by the film's emotions, sincerity, and classical fantasy tone rather than aiming for heightened realism or showing performance. That cast deliver work that feel restrained, emotionally clear, and in service of the story's moral atmosphere. From a reviewer emotional perspective, the performance succeed not by overwhelming the viewer and by gently guiding emotional engagement. Among the lead actor, the four performer portraying the Pennywise sibling carry the emotional weight of the film. William Mosley as Peter's Pevensie deliver a performance defined by quiet seriousness and visible pressure. Emotionally, his acting communicates the burden of responsibility more than overt confidence. Mosley's strength lying in restraint. His facial expression and body language often convey uncertainty and self-doubt, which make his leadership arc feel earned rather than assumed. The emotional effect is subtle but effective, especially for viewers who relate to being placed in role but they do not feel ready for. Anna Popplewell as Sansan Pevensia bring emotional realism and caution to her role. Her performance is grounded and controlled, reflecting Sansan's analytical and protective nature. Emotionally, Popplewell excel at conveying internal conflict, concern, fear, hesitation without excessive dialogue. Her acting help anchor the film more fantastical element by offering a humor emotional response to uncertainty. This makes Sansan an important emotional bridge between the audience and the story, more symbolic moment. Kandar Cannons as Edmund Pevensie deliver one of the most emotionally impactful performances in the film. His portrayal leans heavily into emotional vulnerability, resentment, and insecurity. Cannons capture the emotional stability of a character driven by inner conflict, and his performance avoids caricature. From an emotional standpoint, his acting allows viewer to understand moral failure as a result of emotional weakness rather than inherent malice. This add emotional depth and make Edmund's arc resonate strongly with audience. Georgia Henley as Lucy's Pevensia provide the emotional heart of the film. Her performance is marked by openness, sincerity, and emotional transparency. Henry's natural expressiveness make Lucy's belief and wonder feel genuine rather than emotionally. Her acting invite the audience to reconnect with a sense of innocence and trust. She carries the film emotional warmth, and her presence soften the heavier thematic moments, especially for younger viewers. The supporting cast play a crucial role in reinforcing the film's emotional tone. Tilda Swinton as the White Witch deliver a performance defined by control, intensity, and emotional coldness rather than exaggerating. When Swinton uses restraint to convey authority and threat emotionally, her performance creates tension through stillness and precision, making her presence feel oppressive without constant aggression. This contrasts effectively with the warmth of the protagonist. Liam Neeson voicing Aslan provide emotional gravitas through vocal performance alone. His calm, mere delivery communicate wisdom, authority, and compassion. Emotionally, Neeson's voice become a stabilizing force within the film, guiding the audience toward reflection rather than excitement. His performance reinforced the film more centered and add emotional weight without visual dominance. Chemistry among the cast is one of the film's strongest assets. The sibling dynamic feel emotionally authentic, marked by moments of disagreement, protectiveness, and sheer vulnerability. The chemistry between the four lead allow the emotional art to feel interconnected rather than isolated. Their interaction create a believable emotional rhythm that mirror real family relationship, enhancing viewers immersion. The emotional chemistry between the lead and the supporting character also strengthen the film's impact. Scenes involving guidance, opposition, and trust are emotionally effective because the actors respond to one another with clear emotional intention rather than theatrical exaggeration. Overall, the acting performance succeeds by honoring the film's emotional sincerity. The leads bring relatable vulnerability, the supporting cast adds symbolic weight, and the chemistry tie everything together. Rather than dominating the story, the performance gently supported, creating an emotional experience that feels honest, balanced, and quietly powerful. The movie approaches realism and character depth in a way that aligns with its classical fantasy identity rather than modern realism. It does not aim to replicate real world behavior in a literal sense, but instead seek emotional truth with a symbolic framework. From a reviewer perspective, the realism of the film is rooted in how characters feel, react, and grow now, not in how closely they resemble everyday people. This distinction is important because it defines how character development and believability function throughout the story. In terms of character development, the film favors gradual emotional progression over dramatic transformation. Characters do not change overnight, nor do they suddenly gain confidence or clarity without struggle. Their development is expressed through hesitation, mistake, and small moment of realization. This slower emotional growth feels believable within the context of the story, especially because the character often resists change before expecting it. Development is shown as something uncomfortable and uncertain, which add credibility to their journey. The film also uses contrast between the character to deepen development. Each main character responds differently to pressure, responsibility, and fear, allowing growth to feel individualized rather than generic. Some characters move toward leadership, other toward trust, and other toward accountability. This variety prevents actors' arc from blending together and give the audience multiple emotional entry points from a depth perspective. This ensemble structure adds richness even when individual arcs remain relatively simple. Believability in the film is achieved through emotional consistency. Character behave in ways that align that they establish fear, desire, and limitation. When they hesitate, doubt, or make poor choices, those action feel emotionally justified rather than forced by the plot. Even with a fantastical setting, the emotional logic remain intact. Viewer may not relate to the emotion, but they can relate to the feeling driving the decision. The movie avoid exaggerated emotional swing, which help maintain realism. Character rarely move from despair to confidence without immediate stages. Emotional response are measured, often expressed through body languages, silence, or restrained dialogue. This understand approach always viewer to feel in emotional gap themselves, making the experience feel more authentic. It also respect younger audience by modeling emotional growth without overstimulation. In terms of emotional range, the film cover a broad spectrum without becoming overwhelming. Fear, hope, guilt, courage, and reassurance are all present, but they are expressed in control where no signal emotion dominate the narrative for too long. This balance gives the story emotional stability and prevent it from feeling manipulative. The emotional range is specifically effective because it involves naturally with the story's progression rather than appearing in isolated moment. One of the film's strengths is how it portrays emotional vulnerability. Characters are allowed to be afraid, uncertain, and conflicted without being ridiculed or dismissed. This openness adds depth by acknowledging that emotional struggle is part of growth. The movie does not equate strength with emotional suppression. Instead, it suggests that awareness of fear is a necessary step toward courage. This approach enhances both realism and emotional resonance. However, the film commitment to archetypal storytelling does place limit on depth. Characters are not explored through complex backstories or internal monologue. These internal lives are communicated through action and reaction rather than interception. For some viewers, they may feel simplistic. From a viewer standpoint, this simplicity is intentional and genre appropriate, but it does not mean that depth is emotional rather than psychological. Believability is also supported by the relationship between actors. In interaction feel emotionally grounded, particularly in moments of disagreement or concern. This relationship provides context for individual choices, making action feel connected rather than isolated. The emotional realism of these dynamics strengthens the audience investment in character outcome. Overall, the films achieve realism and by depth, prioritizing emotional truth over detail. Heavy realism, character development is steady and purposeful. Believability is maintained through emotional consistency, and the emotional range is wide but controlled. While the character may not feel complex in a modern dramatic scene, they feel honest within the story's moral and emotional framework. This balance allows the movie to remain accessible while still offering meaningful character experience that resonate across age group. The production budget of the movie reflects a deliberate and calculated investment in large scale fantasy filmmaking rather than excess for its own sake. Calmly analyze, the budget sits within the upper range of early 2000s studio fantasy project, signaling an intention to build a credible world that could stand alongside other major genre releases of the period. Estimates generally place the production cost in the high nine-figure range, commonly sitting around the upper hundreds of millions, which immediately position the word as a premium studio effort rather than a mid-tier adaptation. Looking at cost range, this level of spending was consistent with the expectation placed on fantasy film at the time. Epic fantasy requires substantial upfront investment because it depended heavily on world building rather than contemporary setting. Set, costume, creature, and environment could not be borrowed from reality. They had to be created, designed, and maintained from scratch. Compared to lower budget adventure film, the cost range here reflects scale, not extravagance. The budget signal ambition. The studio clearly intended the film to feel expensive, immersive, and visually authoritative. A major portion of the budget was dedicated to resource allocation in visual effect and creature design. The movie featured numerous non-human characters that intended to feel emotionally expressive and physically present. At the time of production, computer generated imagery was effective but still relatively expensive and time consuming. Creating believable digital characters require extensive animation, rendering, and post production work. That this was not limited to spectacle heavy scenes, even quiet dialogue driven moments involving digital character required careful technical execution, increasing overall cost. Another significant allocation went into physical production element. Large scale sets were constructed to give the fantasy world tangible weight rather than relying entirely on digital backdrop. Reallocation were also used to enhance realism and scale, which added expenses related to travel, logistics, crew coordination, and equipment transport. These choices reflect a production heavy philosophy that value physical authenticity even when digital tools were available. Costumes and props are presenting a notable investment. Fantasy storytelling demand visual coherence across armor, clothing, weapon, and symbolic items. These elements needed to reflect a consistent culture and history, even if only impile. Creating and maintaining hundreds of costumes for principal actors and background performers added both material and labor cost. This investment paid off in visual credibility, but it contributed significantly to the overall budget. When placed alongside similar films, the budget appear well aligned with genre standards of the era. Comparable fantasy release from the early 2000s often fell into similar cost brackets, especially those intended to launch franchise. Some well-known fantasy trilogies benefited from the sheer production cost across multiple films, which lowered the parent budget of individual entries. In contrast, the movie carried the full burden of establishing its worth in a single production, which naturally increased its standalone core. Compared to other fantasy film released around the same time, its budget reflects a middle ground between technical ambition and financial cushion. It is higher than many single installment adventure films, but lower than productions that rely heavily on continuously large scale battle sequence. The spending priority suggests that the filmmaker focused more on long-term word credibility than on short-term spectral overload. From an analytical standpoint, the production budget can be seen as a strategic foundation rather than a gamble. Much of the investment went into a set that could be reused in future installments, such as digital model design, framework, and visual language. This approach is typical for film envisioned as the beginning of a larger series, where initial costs are expected to support later efficiency. Overall, the production budget reflects a careful balance between ambition and discipline. The cost range aligned with industry expectation for epic fantasy. Resource allocation favor immersion and emotional credibility, and comparison to similar films suggests that spending was competitive rather than excessive. Calmly assess the budget represent an intentional effort to give the story the scale and seriousness is it required, while staying it with the financial norms of its genre and era. The domestic box office performance of the film can best be understood by looking at how it play within its primary region, how audience respond over time, and how it compare with other film released in a similar space. In the North America market, the film opened with solid momentum, reflecting strong initial curiosity driven by brand recognition, marketing reach, and general genre appeal. While it may not have shattered opening weekend record, it debuted indicated that there was a sizable audience ready to engage with this type of story on a big screen. From a regional perspective, the domestic markets show a clear divide between family audience and older viewers. Families and younger audience contributed heavily during the opening week, especially through weekend audience, while adult viewers tended to show up more gradually. This pattern is common for fantasy and adventure films that balance spectacle with emotional storytelling. The movie benefited from school holiday timing and repeat family visits, which helped stabilize earning after the initial release period rather than causing a sharp drop off. Looking at audience trend, word of mouth plays a significant role in shaping the film domestic trajectory. Early reaction emphasized the emotional tone and world building rather than non-stop action, while which seemed slightly narrow the audience compared to the more fast-paced blockbuster. However, this same quality helped the film maintain steady attendance across multiple weeks. Instead of relying entirely on opening weekend hype, it demonstrated respectful staying power, especially among viewers who value character-driven fantasy. Another notable trend was the difference between the urban and the suburban performance. Large metropolitan areas show strong attendance early on, driven by core genre fan and opening weekend viewers. Suburban and smaller market, however, contributed more consistently over time, particularly through family-oriented showing. This gradual expansion across region helped the film avoid the front-loaded earning pattern that often affect heavily marketed franchise film. When making comparison to similar release, the movie domestic box office comfortably in the mid to the upper tier of its genre. It does not outperform the biggest fantasy juggernauts of its era, especially those backed by long established from base or multi film build up. However, it clearly surpassed smaller standalone fantasy film that lack comparable production scale or studio banking. In this sense, its performance reflect a balance between ambition and accessibility. Compared to the action heavy blockbuster release in the same time frame, the movie earned less on a week to week basis but show better audience retention. Film built around constant spectacle often spike quickly and decline sharply, while this movie earning curve was more measured. This suggests that audience were engaging with it as an experience rather than one time event. The domestic box office also reflect how tonal expectation influence commercial outcome. Because the film leaned into emotional theme and immersive world building, it attracted viewers seeking depth alongside entertainment. While this approach limited its appeal to audience craving relentless pacing, it strengthened loyalty among those who connected with its atmosphere and message. In the broader context of the domestic performance, the movie can be considered commercially healthy rather than explosive. Its earning demonstrated that there was a strong interest in thoughtfully produced fantasy within the North America market. Even if it did not dominate the box office conservation week after week, the result was a steady, respectable run that reinforced the film value as a long-term property rather than a short-lived hunt. Overall, the domestic box office tells a story of consistency and audience trust. With its region, it attracted a diverse viewership, followed recognizable audience trend, and held its own when compared to similar films. Rather than relying on extreme height, it achieved success through sustained engagement, which remain a meaningful indicator of the domestic markets. The international box office performance of the movie present a distinct picture from its domestic run, shaped strongly by regional preferences, market reception, and the effectiveness of the global market strategy. In North America, the film benefited from the universal appeal of the fantasy imagery and the emotional storytelling, which often translate more smoothly across cultures than dialogue heavy or culturally specific genres. As a result, the international earning form a substantial portion of the movie's overall revenue. From a regional standpoint, Europe emerged as one of the strongest international contributors. Markets such as the United Kingdom, Germany, and the France responded positively, driven by long-standing appreciation for fantasy and myth-inspired cinema. These regions tend to favor films that emphasizing atmosphere, visual craftsmanship, and emotional sincerity, all of which align well with the movie tone. Attendance in these countries was steady rather than explosive, suggesting consistent rather than short-term hype. In parts of Asia, The performance was more varied. Some markets show strong engagement due to the film's visual scale and family-friendly accessibility, while others responded more cautiously. Cultural difference in storytelling expectation play a role here, as certain audience favor faster pacing or clear genre convention. Despite this, the movie still achieved respectable result across major Asian territories, particularly in urban centers where international studio release traditionally perform well. Emerging market contributing meaningfully but domestically. In region where cinema dependence is more price sensitive, the film premium positioning limited its reach. However, its brand age appeal helped counterbalance this factor, allowing it to draw family audience and younger audience who might otherwise skip a large scale fantasy relay. The market did not drive record breaking number, but they add to the film's overall international stability. In terms of market reception, international audience tended to respond positively to the film's emotional tone and visual immersion. Reviews and audience reaction abroad often highlighted craftsmanship and mood rather than spectacle alone. This reception helped the movie sustain its theatrical presence longer in sustained territories, even if its opening weekends were not expansionally high. Extended run in select region indicate that the film benefited from gradual audience discovery rather than immediate saturation. The role of marketing impact was especially significant overseas. International campaigns earns heavily on the visual element, recognizable branding, and the promise of rich cinematic experience rather than detailed narrative hook. This strategy was effective in market where language barrier must otherwise reduce engagement. Trailers, poster, and promotional material emphasize scale and emotion, allowing audience to grasp the film's appeal quickly without relying on localized storytelling context. Localized marketing adjustment also influence performance in region where fantasy is considered more niche. Promotions highlighted universal theme and spectacle to broad appeal. In contrast, market already respective to the genre receive campaign that lean into world building and emotional resonance. This flexible approach helped the movie avoid underperformance in territories where a one-size-fits-all strategy must have failed. When comparing international learning to similar film, the movie position itself as a solid global performer rather than a runaway international hit. It did not dominate every market, but it consistently delivered across region, which is often more valuable for long-term financial health. Many comparable fantasy films show extreme dependence on a handful of territories. This movie avoided that pitfall by remaining balanced contribution from multiple regions. Overall, the international box office performance reflect a film that traveled well culturally, even it did not peak everywhere simultaneously. Strong European turnout, mix of speculation, reception, and steady contribution from emerging market combined to create a healthy international profile. Without relying on plot driven appeal, the movie abroad demonstrate how thoughtfully marketing and broad emotional accessibility can sustain global interest across diverse regions. The worldwide gross of the movie represent the combined financial response of a truly global audience, reflecting how the film performed across the domestic and international market rather than in isolation. When viewed as a whole, the worldwide learning show that the movie functions as a broadly appealing studio release with reach beyond any single region. Its global across accumulated steadily supported by consistent performance in multiple territories rather than overwhelming dominance in just one market. This kind of earning pattern offers signal durability and wild acceptance rather than short term hype. A key factor in understanding worldwide growth is how different regions contributed at different scale. North America provided a strong foundation, but international markets significantly expanded the revenue base. European territories, several Asian market, and select emerging regions collectively form a substantial share of total earnings. This balance indicates that the film theme, visual style, and emotional accessibility resonated with audience from varied cultural background, allowing it to perform reliable across border. Beyond ticket sale, total revenue must be considered in terms of revenue stream. The worldwide gross figure typically reflects theatrical earning before expenses, but it exists with a broader financial ecosystem. Theatrical revenue is split between exhibitor and distributor, meaning the studio does not retain the full box office amount. Earlier in a theatrical run, a higher percentage flows back to the studio, while later week favor theater owner more heavily. These sliding scale play a crucial role in break-even calculation. In addition to the theatrical box office, worldwide performance strengthened downstream revenue opportunity. Strong global visibility improved the film value in home media, digital rental, and licensing agreement. While these earnings are not included directly in worldwide gross figure, but they are heavily influenced by theatrical processing. A film that perform well globally tend to generate longer lasting and more diverse income stream, which can significantly offset high production cost over time. The break-even point is reached when total studio revenue equal the combined cost of production, marketing, and distribution. Production budget alone rarely tell the full story. Distribution costs include global marketing campaign, dubbing, subtitling, and original promotion, and physical or digital delivery at a substantial rate of expense. For large-scale release, marketing and distribution can approach or even succeed half of the production budget, especially when targeting worldwide audience. Because studios do not receive the full worldwide growth, the break-even threshold is typically much bigger than the production budget itself. As a general industry rule, a movie often need to earn roughly 2 to 2.5 times to production cost at the global box office to break even theoretically. This multiple account for exhibitor split and distribution expense. In that case, the film worldwide gross place it near or slightly above that estimated threshold depending on the exact scale of marketing spending. Distribution strategy also affect break-even outcome. A wide global release increase upfront cost but allow faster revenue accumulation across regions. Staggered release reduce immediate expense but risk piracy and loss of momentum. The film approach favored broad international exposure, which raised initial distribution costs but improved total earning potential by maintaining a strong global presence. From a financial preserve perspective, the film worldwide gross suggests a controlled path toward recoupment rather than explosive profitability. It may not have generative massive surplus during its theatrical run alone, but it positioned itself to recover costs through a combination of box office revenue and long-term ancillary income. This is common for effect-heavy fantasy film where financial success is measured over years rather than weeks. Overall, the worldwide gross and break-even analysis point to a film that achieved financial stability through global reach. By engaging a diverse global audience, spotting multiple revenue streams, and managing high but purposeful distribution costs, the movie demonstrated how worldwide performance can sustain large-scale production even without record-breaking box office dominance. Assessing whether the movie was profitable required looking beyond headline box office number and calmly weighing revenue versus cost, the role of ancillary income, and the long term return on investment. Profitability in large scale studio films, especially fact driven fantasy or adventure project, is rarely a simple yes or no calculation based solely on theoretical performance. Instead, it emerges from how well multiple revenue channels collectively offset substantial upfront expenses. From a revenue versus cost perspective, the movie faced a high financial threshold from the outset. Its production budget alone placed it among expensive studio release, and when global marketing and distribution costs are added, the total investment rose significantly. Theatrical revenue, while strong and globally distributed, was not fully retained by the studio. A sizable portion of the box office earning went to a exhibitor, meaning that only a fraction of the worldwide gross translated into direct studio income. This dynamic make it clear that theatrical success alone was unlikely to generate dramatic short-term profit. However, the film did not underperform its theater. Its worldwide box office was sufficient to cover a large portion of the combined production and distribution cost. While it may not have produced a massive surplus during its theatrical run, it provided that more damaging outcome of failing to approach its break-even point in industry terms. This placed the film in a financially valuable category rather than a loss-making one. Ancillary income play a crucial role in tipping the balance toward profitability. Post-theatrical revenue stream often represent a substantial share of total earning for large studio film. Home entertainment format, digital rental, streaming license, and television right all benefit from the visibility created by global theatrical release. Because the more achieve wild international exposure, its value in these secondary market was strengthened. Even moderate theoretical success was significantly boost long-term earning when paired with strong ancillary performance. Merchandising and licensing also contribute, particularly for film with distinctive word character or visual identities. While not every movie because a merchandise a powerhouse recognizable fantasy property tend to generate steady licensing income over time. These revenue accumulate gradually and are often not reflected in early financial assessment, yet they meaningfully improve the film's overall profitability profile. When evaluating return on investment, timing becomes essential. ROI for high budget film is rarely immediate. Instead of delivering rapid profit, these movies are designed to generate value across multiple years. In this context, ROI should be viewed as a cumulative rather than intensious. The movie ability to recoup costs through a combination of theoretical revenue and ancillary income suggests a moderate but positive return over time. Importantly, profitability also extends beyond direct financial gain. A film that performs respectably can enhance studio reputation, strengthen relationship with international distributor, and increase the long-term value of related intellectual property. These indirect benefits do not appear on balance sheet but influence future earning potentials and strategic decision. Overall, the movie can be considered profitable in a measured long-term sense rather than a blockbuster windfall. Revenue versus cost analysis show theoretical earning alone were likely insufficient for major surplus, but ancillary income filled much of that gap. When combined, these streams support a reasonable return on investment. Rather than representing a financial drain for failure, the movie stands as an example of sustainable studio profitability achieved through global reach, diversified income, and patience in realizing return. General audience reaction to the movie reveal a layer and diverse response shaped by demographic, evolving viewers' feedback, and varying level of engagement over time. Rather than provoking a single dominant reaction, the film generated a spectrum of responses that reflect differences in age, viewing expectation, and emotional preferences. This variety of reaction is typical for large-scale films that aim to balance spectacle with emotional depth. From a demographic perspective, younger viewers and families tended to respond most positively. This group connected strongly with the film's sense of wonder, visual richness, and emotional accessibility. For younger audience, The movie offered an immersive experience that felt both entertaining and easy to engage with, even without deep familiarity with genre convention. Parents often view it as a suitable shared experience, which help reinforce repeat viewing and long-term positive sentiment. Teen and young adult demographics show a more mixed but still generally favorable reaction. Many viewers in this age range participate the emotional arc and atmospheric storytelling, particularly the emphasis on internal conflict and identity. However, some within this group express a desire for faster pacing or more intense action element. Their feedback often reflected a comparison with other contemporary films that prioritize non-stop momentum, highlighting how personal taste influence reception. Older audience, particularly those with an interest in fantasy or action-driven stories, responded positively to the film tone and thematic weight. This demographic tended to engage more thoughtfully, focusing on emotional resonance and world building rather than surface level excitement. Viewer feedback from this group often described the movie as sincere and immersive, even if not groundbreaking. Those invested in the genre, however, sometimes found the pacing slower than expected, leading to more reverse reaction. Looking at viewers' feedback overall, emotional response emerged as a consistent theme. Many audience members highlighted moments that felt heartfelt or reflected, noting that the movie encouraged empathy rather than relying solely on spectacle. Positive feedback frequently mentioned the movie film's mood and its ability to create a sense of emotional immersion. At the same time, critical audience reaction often center on expectation rather than execution, with some viewers noting that the movie did not fully align with their preferred style of entertainment. The engagement level provided another useful and the film generated strong initial curiosity, reflecting in early attendance and social discussion. Over time, engagement shifted from hype driven conservation or to more reflective commentary rather than dominating short term discourse. The movie maintaining a quieter but more sustained presence. This pattern suggests that audience engage with it on a personal level rather than treating it as a cultural event. Repeat viewing also play a role in shaping audience perception. Viewers who return for additional screening often reported a deeper perception, appreciation for emotional nuances and character dynamic. This indicates that the film reward attention and patience, strengthening its connection with certain audience segment while not every viewer felt compelled to revisit it. Those who did often become its most vocal supporter. Online discussion and informal word of mouth further illustrate the range of audience reaction. Positive conservation emphasizes atmosphere, emotion, sincerity, and visual credibility, while more critical discussion focus on pacing and tonal expectation. Importantly, even mixed feedback tended to acknowledge the film ambition, suggesting respect for its goal even when individual enjoyment vary. Overall, the audience reaction can be described as broadly positive with notable variation across demographic. Younger viewer and family performed the most enthusiastic base, while older and genre savvy audience engage more and analytically. Viewers feedback highlighted emotional connection as a key strength, and the engagement patterns show steady interest rather than fleeting excitement. Taken together, these reactions paint a picture of the film that connected meaningfully within its audience, even if did not aim to please every demographic equally. Box office performance played a powerful role in shaping how movies perceived, often extended far beyond simple financial reporting. In this case, a film commercial result influenced its critical reception, contributed to assessment of studio reputation, and frame how it was discussed in genre comparison. Even for viewers and critics who do not closely follow financial figure, box office narrative subtly affect expectation and long-term judgment. From the standpoint of critical reception, box office performance often act as a contextual filler because the movie achievable, respectable, but not record breaking earning. Critics tended to approach it with mere expectation rather than being judged as an unstoppable cultural phenomenon. It was evaluated more on craftsmanship, tone, and intact. This allowed for more nuanced view where strength and weakness were discussed without the pressure of hype-driven extremes. Some critics view the film's steady financial showing as evidence that it connected with audience in a meaningful, if understated way. At the same time, the absence of explosive box office dominance prevented the movie from being framed as a defining cinematic moment. This influenced how critical praise was expressed. Positive views often emphasize emotion, sincerity, and technical competency rather than evolutionary impact. Conversely, criticism was sometimes amplified by comparison to higher grossing TPers, creating a narrative that financial performance and artistic ambition were misaligned, even when the gap was not necessarily justified. Studio reputation is another area strongly shaped by box office outcome. For the studio behind the film, it reinforced performance on image of reliability rather than risk taking excess. The movie demonstrated that the studio could produce large scale genre film that attract global audience without relying solely on established mega franchise. While the earning may not exceed expectation dramatically, they supported audience in the studio's production and marketing strategy. However, the box office number also influenced internal and external decision making because the film performed solidified rather than spectacularly. It may have been seen as a demonstrated success instead of a clear signal to aggressively expand the property. This perception affect how studio allocate future budget, greenlight sequels, or invest in similar project. In this way, box office performance shape not only reputation but also the creative direction a studio is willing to pursue. When placed in genre comparison, box office result even more influential fantasy and adventure film are often judged against the highest grossing example in their category, many of which benefited from multi-film built up or long established fan bases against such as benchmark. The movie performance appear modest. This comparison can unfairly diminish appreciation for films that succeed on their own term but do not match the financial peak of genre giants. At the same time, box office performance can elevate perception when compared to the underperforming genre peers. This movie avoid the stigma of a financial failure, which often overshadow artistic decision entirely. Instead, it occupy a middle space in genre conservation, frequently cited as an example of a well-crafted but commercially restrained release. This positioning allow it to be revisited more kindly over time, especially as an audience taste evolve. Public perception is also shaped by how box office narrative are communicated. A headline focusing on whether a movie met expectation or fell short can influence casual viewer attitude if they have not seen the film. In this case, a narrative of solid but unspectacular performance free the movie as a respectable effort rather than a must see event, subtly affecting its cultural footprint. Overall, the film box office performance had a complex impact on perception. It encouraged balanced critical reception, reinforcing the studio image of competence and shape its standing with genre comparison rather than defining the movie as either a triumph or a disappointment. The box office position it as a major success, influencing how discussed, remembered, and valued in the broader cinematic landscape. From a viewer standpoint, the movie stands as a thoughtful, crafted production that prioritizes atmosphere and emotional resonance over sheer spectacle. In terms of cinematic quality deliver a visually cohesive experience with careful framing and pacing that support immersion rather than distraction. The production value is consistently strong, showing clear investment in world building, design, and technical execution, even if it avoids the success often associated with blockbuster filmmaking. Performances are notable strength. The cast approaches their role with sincerity, grounded the film larger concept in believable emotion. Lead performance carry the emotional weight effectively while supporting role, act, action, and balance without feeling underdeveloped. Chemistry between characters feel organic, feel helping the story maintain emotional credibility throughout. Thematically, the film explore identity, responsibility, emotional connection with a steady, confident tone. These themes are handled with restraint, allowing moment to breathe rather than forcing dramatic emphasis. This approach will resonate strongly with viewers who appreciate reflective storytelling. That said, the movie is not without weakness. The mere pacing may feel slow for audience expecting constant momentum, and the emphasis on mood over action limited appeal for some viewers. Overall, it is a well made, emotionally grounded film whose strength lies in sincerity and craftsmanship rather than scale or intensity. This movie is best suited for viewers who enjoy emotionally driven storytelling, immersive atmosphere rather than fast paced spectacle. In terms of audience base, it will appeal more to viewers who appreciate character focused narrative and thoughtful theme. Those who enjoy taking time to absorb mood, visual, and emotional notes are likely to find the experience rewarding. Looking at genre preferences, the film works well for fans of fantasy or adventure that emphasize world building and emotional depth over non-stop action. Viewers who value reflective themes such as identity, responsibility, emotional connection will likely connect strongly with its tone. It is less ideal for audience who prefer high energy thriller, heavy action, or constant plot twist, or the film intentionally maintain a calmer, more measured style. In terms of age group, the movie is suitable for teens and adults who can engage with its emotional layer and thematic way. Younger children may enjoy the visuals but might not fully connect with the deeper emotional element. Older viewers, particularly those who appreciate the slower pacing and thematic story, may find it especially satisfying. Overall, the film is recommended for the audience seeking emotional resonance and cinematic atmosphere. It may not suit the viewer looking for quick excitement, but it offers a meaningful experience for those open to a more reflective and emotionally grounded style.